Claire Whitmore, and let me tell you a story, my story, about how love can become a cage, and how the fight to reclaim your life can cost you everything except the things that truly matter. I wasn't supposed to be standing here, not after the man I trusted most tried to erase me from my own family's life. You see, I married a man who wore perfection like a suit, polished, charming, adored in courtrooms and charity galas alike. But behind those tailored smiles was a man who believed control was love, and that love could be weaponized. When the mask finally cracked, I was left facing a tidal wave, a courtroom battle, a media smear campaign, and the terrifying possibility of losing the two children who had become my world. This isn't a story about giving up. It's a story about standing taller than you ever thought you could. About finding the strength to say, you will not erase me, and you will not erase the love I built. So if you're ready, come with me. Because this fight, it's only just begun. Chapter 1. The Call That Shattered Us. 5 years of marriage ended with a single phone call, heard on speaker over Sunday pot roast. The scent of rosemary and roasted garlic hung in the air, thick and comforting, the way it always was on Sundays. I had arranged the silverware just so, polished the crystal glasses until they gleamed beneath the chandelier's warm light. Daniel liked things to be perfect. Appearances mattered. Appearances. The word tasted bitter now, though I hadn't yet admitted why. Across from me, Abigail toyed with her napkin, restless as always. 15 going on 30, that girl. Beside her, Ethan fiddled with his fork, eyes darting between his sister and the doorway. They sensed something, though no one had spoken of it. Daniel was late, again. When the front door finally opened, a gust of crisp autumn air swept through the foyer. Daniel strode in, loosened his tie with one practiced motion, and offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry work ran long," I forced a nod. "Dinner's ready." We gathered around the table. I carved the roast in clean, precise slices, masking the tremor in my wrist. Conversation stuttered, polite, and shallow. Daniel asked Abigail about school, Ethan about soccer, both responding with clipped answers. Then it happened. Daniel's phone buzzed, once, twice, then rang. He glanced at the screen, thumb hovering. "Decline it," I said softly. "It's family time." But instead of silencing it, Daniel pressed speaker, as if by accident. A woman's voice poured into the room. Clear, sweet, devastating. "Hi, love. I can't stop thinking about last night. I miss you already. Are we still on for tomorrow?" Silence. Breathless, choking silence. Abigail's chair scraped back violently. Her fork clattered to the floor. Ethan's face crumpled, eyes wide with confusion. "Who is that?" Abigail's voice shook with rage. "Dad, who is she?" Daniel's jaw tensed. He reached for the phone, fumbling to disconnect. "It's nothing. A misunderstanding." "Don't lie," I said, my voice low and cold. "We heard everything." For a moment, Daniel held my gaze, challenging, calculating, then exhaled sharply. "Her name is Vanessa. We've been seeing each other for some time, and I'm leaving tomorrow." The word struck harder than any slap. I gripped the edge of the table, the room tilting beneath me. But I would not fall. Not here, not in front of him. "You planned this." My voice was steady now, a blade honed by betrayal. "For how long?" "Months," he admitted, almost proudly. "The children will stay with me, of course. Legally, you have no claim," Ethan whimpered, shrinking into his seat. Abigail stood, fists clenched, eyes blazing. "You're not taking us," she shouted. Daniel's expression hardened. "You'll do what the court decides." I rose slowly, every muscle trembling with contained fury. "You've made your choice, Daniel," I said, voice like ice. "And now I'll make mine." Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs. Behind me, voices clashed. Abigail shouting, Ethan crying. Daniel trying to assert order. I heard none of it. In the dim light of the guest room, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. My old portfolio lay inside, sketches, articles, a life I had buried beneath years of sacrifice. My fingers traced the worn leather cover. "No more," I whispered. Somewhere downstairs, the door slammed shut. Silence fell, but within me something had begun to awaken. I didn't know how long I sat there, fingers resting on the old portfolio. Time had folded in on itself. Memories, regrets, flashes of a life I had once loved and no longer recognized. 5 years ago, when I married Daniel, I believed I was choosing stability. I had already lost so much. My father's sudden passing, a failed engagement that left my confidence in ruins. Daniel had seemed like a safe harbor, successful, respected, a man who knew how to manage the chaos of the world. I hadn't realized I was stepping into a gilded cage. The signs had come slowly. First, subtle comments about my hobby of art curation, then the quiet discouragement whenever I mentioned returning to work. Over time, I became less Claire Whitmore and more Daniel's wife. Even the children, Abigail and Ethan, had been folded into his narrative. I was there to serve, to smooth the edges of his perfect life. But tonight, that narrative had shattered, and in its place something raw and fierce had begun to surface. A soft knock broke through my reverie. "Mom?" Abigail's voice trembled. I opened the door. There she stood, no longer the defiant teenager of the dinner table, but a child fighting not to fall apart. Without a word, I pulled her into my arms. She clung to me, shoulders shaking. "He can't take us," she whispered. "We won't let him." "I know," I said, though my voice betrayed no certainty. "But we have to be smart about this." Behind her, Ethan hovered, eyes wide and tear-streaked. I knelt and opened my arms. He rushed in, burying his face against my shoulder. "You're our mom," he sobbed. "I don't care what he says." The words pierced through my defenses. Whatever legal arguments Daniel planned, whatever cold logic he intended to weaponize, he would never erase the bond forged in this room in these moments. "Listen to me, both of you," I said gently. "We are going to fight, but we must be careful. He'll try to twist everything we say, everything we do, so for now, we stay calm. We stay together." They nodded, small faces set with fierce determination. "Mom," Abigail hesitated, "there's something you should see." I followed her to her room. She unlocked her phone and scrolled to a series of screenshots. I saw Dad texting her weeks ago. I didn't know what to do. There, plain as day, were messages between Daniel and Vanessa, discussions of money transfers, plans to move in together, even talk of adjusting custody arrangements. "How long have you had these?" I asked, stunned. "A while. I kept them, just in case." "Smart girl," I whispered, pulling her close. Below the messages, one line stood out. "Once Claire is out of the house, the kids will adjust. I'll make sure of it." A chill ran through me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated erasure. "We need help," I said aloud, mind already racing. "Olivia, Meredith, Ben." I had distanced myself for too long, trying to shield them from Daniel's world. "No more. Stay here," I told the children. "I'm making a call." In the guest room, I dialed Olivia first. The moment she answered, I heard the edge in her voice. "Claire? What's wrong?" "I need you," I whispered. "Daniel's leaving. He's taking everything, and he's trying to take the kids." A beat of silence. Then, "I'm on my way." As I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I was not afraid to ask for help. I returned to Abigail and Ethan, knelt before them. "No matter what happens next," I said softly, You are my children in every way that matters, and I will fight for us. They nodded, tears glistening but unfallen. Just then, my phone buzzed. An email notification. I opened it with trembling fingers. Formal notice. Temporary custody filing, Suffolk County Family Court. The hearing date was set. It's starting, I whispered. And I was ready. Will Claire find the strength and the right allies to fight Daniel's calculated plan to erase her from the children's lives? If your own family was being torn apart by betrayal, how far would you go to protect the bonds that truly matter? Stay with us, because in Chapter 2, Claire's quiet resolve will ignite a battle that no one saw coming. Chapter 2, The Woman He Underestimated. When your life collapses, your first instinct is to call someone. I had forgotten who I could still trust. The dawn broke, pale and cold, over Boston. I stood by the kitchen window of the Morrisons' apartment, a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands. The city below had already begun to stir, its hume faint beneath the glass. In the quiet of this unfamiliar space, I replayed the events of the night before like a film on endless loop. Daniel had filed for temporary custody within hours of his departure. Efficient. Ruthless. The man knew how to play this system, and worse, he had expected me to crumble beneath its weight. He underestimated me. The thought, clear and sharp, cut through the fog of exhaustion. Behind me, the apartment stirred. Abigail and Ethan slept in the guest room, their small bodies curled together for comfort. Eleanor and Robert had insisted we stay here. You'll be safer, and the children need stability right now, Robert had said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. They had been kind, more than kind, but I couldn't rely on kindness alone. I need a strategy, I whispered to the empty room. As if summoned, a knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find Olivia, her coat still damp from the morning mist. You called. I came, she said simply, pulling me into a brief, fierce embrace. I fought the tears that threatened. Thank you. We don't have time for tears, Olivia said, stepping inside. We have a fight to plan. She shed her coat and pulled out a worn notebook. Her practical nurse's mind was already in motion. First, you need legal support, she began. Not just any lawyer. A specialist in family court, someone who knows how to handle men like Daniel. Meredith and Ben, I said, my voice gaining strength. I need them. Then call them, Olivia urged. Now. I picked up my phone, hands steadier than expected. Within 20 minutes, Meredith and Ben were on their way. By the time they arrived, the living room had become a war room. Files spread across the coffee table, Olivia pacing, Robert brewing a fresh pot of coffee. We've reviewed the notice, Ben began, his voice calm but firm. Daniel's move was calculated. Filing for temporary custody first sets the narrative in his favor. Unless we counter quickly. He's using everything against me, I said, including the fact that I'm not their biological mother. Which is why we'll lean on the doctrine of de facto parenting, Ben explained, and we'll bolster that with community testimony and concrete evidence of your role in the children's lives. We have screenshots, Abigail's voice rang out from the hallway. I turned to find her standing there defiant, her phone in hand. Abigail, I began. No, she interrupted. He's lying about you. I won't let him. She handed the phone to Ben, who scanned the messages with a grim smile. This is gold. Shows premeditation manipulation, not the image of a concerned father. Ethan appeared beside his sister, clutching a small scrapbook. I made this for school. It has pictures with Mom, all the things we've done together. Good man, Robert murmured approvingly. Ben looked at me. Claire, we have a fighting chance, but you need to understand, this will be ugly. Daniel won't hold back. Neither will I said quietly. Just then, Meredith's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Claire, she said slowly, you need to see this. She turned the phone toward me. An article, freshly posted online, headlined, Prominent Boston Attorney's Wife in Emotional Crisis Amid Custody Battle. A photo of me, taken without my knowledge, beneath the headline. He's playing to the court of public opinion, Olivia said darkly. We need to hit back, now. I straightened, something fierce settling in my chest. Then let's give them a story they won't forget. My words hung in the air, met with a chorus of determined nods. For the first time in days, the fog of helplessness had begun to lift. Ben leaned forward. First, we control the narrative. Claire, you need to authorize a formal response to this article. I'll reach out to a PR contact I trust. Will it help? I asked. It will buy us time and sympathy, Meredith replied, and it will remind the court that you're not alone or unstable. I swallowed hard. Daniel was playing a dangerous game, one I hadn't trained for, but that no longer mattered. The rules had changed. Do it, I said firmly. Ben drafted a statement, calm, composed, unapologetic. Mrs. Claire Whitmore has served as a constant parental figure to Abigail and Ethan Whitmore for the past 5 years. Any assertion to the contrary is false and will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. Perfect, Meredith said. Now evidence, the more the better. Olivia rose, already scrolling through her phone. I'll contact the kids' teachers. There are plenty of school events where Claire was present. Photos, testimonials, they'll help. I can talk to my art colleagues, I added. They know the sacrifices I made for this family. Good, Ben said. But remember, Daniel will come after you personally. Emotional instability, parental unfitness, even financial dependency, we counter each point before he can weaponize it. I glanced at Abigail and Ethan, their faces pale but resolute. And us? Abigail asked. You're key witnesses, Ben replied, but we'll prepare carefully. The court must see your words as genuine, not coached. Ethan clutched his scrapbook tighter. I want them to know she's my mom. They will, I promised softly. Robert cleared his throat. Claire, there's one more angle to consider. Our role. I turned to him. Yours? Daniel has tried to distance us from the children, Robert explained. But legally, we have standing as grandparents. Eleanor and I can file for visitation rights and publicly support your position. Would you? I asked, the words catching in my throat. We would, Eleanor said firmly. And we will. Emotion swelled in my chest. I wasn't alone, not anymore. Then, let's proceed, I said. The next hours blurred into a flurry of activity. Meredith compiled financial records, Ben drafted initial motions, Olivia coordinated with teachers and friends, and I finally allowed myself to hope. By late afternoon, the first cracks in Daniel's facade began to show. Claire, Olivia called, phone pressed to her ear. Listen to this. She switched to speaker. There are concerns. A strained voice said. Daniel has approached several school board members, implying you're unstable. He's pushing hard. Who is this? I asked. An old friend, Olivia said, off the record. But we have confirmation. He's trying to stack the deck. Then we move faster, Ben said grimly. Claire, we'll file for an emergency hearing first thing tomorrow, and there's one more thing. He opened his laptop, pulling up a public court filing. Daniel just submitted a motion to restrict your contact with the children, effective immediately pending review. The room fell silent. He wants to erase me, I whispered. Ben met my gaze. He can try, but he hasn't met the woman you're about to become. Resolve burned in my chest. I had lost too much already. I wouldn't lose this. Then we fight, I said. At that moment, Meredith's phone buzzed again. She read the message, color draining from her face. Claire. Daniel's attorney just served us. The emergency hearing is set for 3 days from now, and he's requested full custody, no visitation for you in the interim. Abigail gasped. Ethan's eyes filled with fear. I stood, voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. We have 3 days, I said, and we will be ready. Will Claire and her fragile alliance gather enough strength and evidence before the emergency hearing Daniel has so ruthlessly set in motion? If your right to be a parent was hanging by a thread, how far would you go to protect the only family that still believes in you? Stay with us, because in Chapter 3, the courtroom battle begins and the children will have their voices heard in ways no one could have expected. Chapter 3. The children he couldn't control. The law said they were his children. That day they proved otherwise. The rain had turned the streets of Boston slick with silver as we arrived at the Morrison apartment once again. It had become a strange kind of sanctuary in these last few days, a place where I could think, plan, breathe. But this morning, breathing felt difficult. The emergency hearing loomed just 48 hours away, and Daniel's legal machine had not slowed. Every hour seemed to bring a new twist, another email from his attorney, another headline twisting reality. "They're trying to paint you as unstable, Claire," Ben had warned. "It's a strategy. If they can shake the court's confidence in your role, they can win temporary full custody, and from there, permanent." But there was one thing Daniel hadn't calculated for. Abigail and Ethan were done being silent. "We want to talk," Abigail had said the night before, her eyes burning with resolve. "We want the judge to hear us. From us." At first I hesitated. The courtroom was no place for children to bear such weight, but their insistence had been unshakable, and Susan Levinson, the family court attorney Ben had brought in, agreed. Judges listen to children at this age, especially when it's clear they're speaking from their own will, Susan had explained. If they are prepared, and they are, it could tip the scales. Now, seated at the Morrisons' long oak dining table, Abigail and Ethan were practicing with Susan. "Tell me why you want to speak," Susan asked gently. Abigail straightened. "Because my dad is lying. Because Claire is our mom, even if the law says she isn't, because I'm tired of him thinking he can decide what we feel." Susan nodded. "And Ethan?" Ethan's voice was softer, but no less firm. "I want to stay with Claire. She reads with me. She goes to my soccer games. She makes me feel safe. Dad he doesn't see us the same way anymore." "Good," Susan said. "But remember, stay calm, be honest, speak from the heart. That's what matters." Across the room, Robert and Eleanor watched silently, pride and sorrow mingling in their eyes. "You're both brave," I whispered to the children, "no matter what happens. I am so proud of you." Abigail squeezed my hand. "We're proud of you too, Mom." The word "Mom" hit me like a wave. No motion, no law could erase that truth. Just then, Olivia entered the room, phone in hand. "Claire, you need to hear this." She put the phone on speaker. A familiar voice came through, one of Abigail's teachers. "I thought you should know Daniel's reached out to several of us. He's trying to collect statements about concerns regarding Claire's involvement at school." "Concerns?" I repeated, stunned. "There are none," the teacher said firmly. "We've seen how much she's done for those kids. But he's trying hard to create doubt." Susan's expression darkened. "He's moving fast. We need to move faster," Ben stepped in. "We'll subpoena any formal statements he tries to submit. Claire, we also need to document everything. Photos, text, event records. The more, the better." "I have photos," Abigail piped up. "Lots. From soccer, school plays, birthdays." "I have my scrapbook," Ethan added, holding it close. "Then let's use them," Susan said. "And Abigail, Ethan, you'll both speak in chambers with the judge, separately. No parents present. Be ready for that." They nodded, faces set with determination. "One more thing," Susan continued. "Claire, you'll need to testify. You'll be cross-examined. They will try to rattle you." "I'm ready," I said, though my heart pounded. "Good," Susan replied, "because this isn't just about custody anymore. It's about showing the court who Daniel really is and who you truly are." I looked at my children, small but unshaken, and felt a fierce surge of resolve. "We fight together," I whispered. Just then the front door buzzed. Meredith answered it, then returned, pale. "A courier," she said. "Daniel's attorney just delivered new evidence, and it's meant to tear you apart in court." Meredith laid the envelope on the table as though it might detonate. "We should open it," Ben said quietly. I nodded, though my fingers trembled as they tore the seal. Inside, a stack of documents, cold, clinical, dangerous. Susan pulled them free, eyes scanning quickly, her brow furrowed. He submitted a psychological assessment, she said. One you never consented to. Claimed observations from school staff, noting alleged signs of parental overattachment and emotional instability. That's a lie, I whispered, pulse racing. Of course it is, Susan replied, but Daniel is betting the court won't have time to verify every claim. He's trying to overwhelm us with volume and doubt. Abigail rose, fury flashing in her eyes. How can he say that? How can he do this to you? I swallowed hard, drawing her close. Because he's scared, sweetheart. Because he knows what the truth will show. And we're going to prove it, Olivia added firmly. Susan began flipping through the rest of the packet. He's also included selective photos, she said grimly. Pictures of Claire alone at school events. No context. Notes from one former nanny claiming them emotional outbursts. And a sworn affidavit from Vanessa Blake stating that Daniel is the primary emotional caregiver. The room went cold. That woman doesn't know us, Ethan burst out. She doesn't know anything. He's stacking the narrative, Ben said, but it won't hold, not if we prepare properly. Then let's do it, I said, my voice steadying. How do we fight this? First, we build your counter-narrative, Susan replied. Teachers, neighbors, family, anyone who can speak to your role. We'll subpoena the school's full event records to show consistent parental involvement. And I'll request that the judge exclude any unconsented psychological reports. Will that work? I asked. It can, Susan said, but only if we keep control of the emotional tone in court, Claire. You need to remain composed no matter what they throw at you. I nodded. I can do that. Abigail squeezed my hand. I'll tell the judge everything, she said fiercely. I'm not afraid of him. Neither am I, Ethan echoed, chin lifting. You're both incredible, I whispered, heart swelling with pride and dread. Ben gathered the documents. We'll be ready, he said. But, Claire, there's one more thing. Daniel's filed a motion requesting the children not be heard in chambers. He's trying to silence them. Can he do that? Meredith asked, aghast. He can try, Susan said, but we'll fight it. Judges often want to hear directly from children this age, and Abigail and Ethan's voices may be the most powerful thing in this case. I looked at my children, small but unshakable. Then we make sure they're heard, I said. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of preparation, drafting affidavits, compiling photos, coordinating with school contacts. Through it all, Abigail and Ethan remained resolute, practicing with Susan, crafting their words with honesty and heart. As night fell, we gathered one last time in the living room. The storm outside mirrored the storm within me, but I had never felt more certain of our path. Tomorrow, Susan said, you'll walk into that courtroom knowing the truth is on your side. Daniel may have the louder voice, but you have the stronger one. I exhaled slowly, drawing strength from every gaze around me. Then let's fight, I said. Just then, Robert's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then turned to us, face grave. That was one of my contacts at the courthouse, he said. Daniel's team has just filed a late measured request, a sealed exhibit. They're planning something for tomorrow, something big. The room fell silent. Whatever it is, I said, voice steel-edged, we face it head-on. But inside, my heart pounded with one unspoken question. What else was Daniel hiding? What is hidden inside the sealed exhibit Daniel's team plans to unleash, and will it be enough to sway the judge against Claire? If someone tried to silence your children's voices in court, would you have the courage to fight for their truth? Stay with us, because in Chapter 4, the courtroom battle begins, and the fight for this family's future reaches a chilling new level. Chapter 4, the courtroom where truth stood tall. Courtrooms are meant to reveal the truth, but in family court, truth is often just another story waiting to be sold. The marble halls of Suffolk County Family Court felt colder than the Boston rain outside. Each step toward the courtroom echoed louder in my ears, though my heart had never felt clearer. We had prepared for this moment, for Daniel's war of narratives, for the sealed exhibit he had filed late last night. But preparation could only carry you so far. In court, everything hinged on what the judge believed. Stay calm. Stay steady. Trust your truth, Susan's voice echoed in my mind. At my side, Abigail and Ethan walked with quiet resolve. Abigail clutched a small leather notebook. Ethan carried his well-worn scrapbook under one arm. "They'll listen to us, right?" Ethan whispered. "They will," I promised. "And no matter what happens, we stay together." Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Judge Margaret Keller, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, presided from the bench. Reputation whispered that she valued facts over theatrics. One small mercy in this battle. Across the aisle, Daniel sat poised in a tailored navy suit, Vanessa at his side. His lawyer, David Harmon, looked every bit the shark we'd expected, eyes scanning the room for weakness. I met Daniel's gaze once and did not look away. Susan leaned in. "They'll go first. Be ready." Judge Keller called the session to order. David rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we present this motion today in the best interest of the children who have regrettably been exposed to emotional instability and undue influence by Mrs. Whitmore, who is not their biological parent." I felt Abigail tense beside me. "To support this," David continued, "we submit this sealed exhibit, affidavits from school staff, selective photographic evidence, and a report from a court-appointed child psychologist, which raises serious concerns about Mrs. Whitmore's emotional fitness." Susan stood at once. "Objection, Your Honor. The psychologist's report was commissioned unilaterally by Mr. Whitmore without consent from Mrs. Whitmore or the children. We request it be excluded." Judge Keller reviewed the documents with a frown. "Counselor, this report lacks court authorization," she said. "I will not admit it as evidence at this time." A small breath of relief escaped me. David pressed on, presenting the rest of the exhibit, carefully curated photos of me alone at events, statements from a former nanny claiming I was over-involved. Mrs. Whitmore created an unhealthy dependency, David argued. For the children's well-being, primary custody should be awarded to Mr. Whitmore. Susan rose again. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that these claims distort reality. The children have a strong, stable bond with Mrs. Whitmore, supported by school records, community testimony, and most importantly, the children's own voices." Judge Keller nodded. "Proceed." Susan called Robert Morrison to the stand first. His calm, authoritative voice carried weight. "I have witnessed Claire's relationship with Abigail and Ethan for 5 years, he testified. "She is their mother in every way that matters. My late daughter would have wanted nothing less." Next came Olivia, detailing my role at school and in the children's daily lives. Then my turn. As I took the stand, every muscle felt tight with anticipation. "Mrs. Whitmore," Susan began, "please describe your relationship with Abigail and Ethan." I looked at my children, Abigail meeting my gaze with fierce pride, Ethan offering a small nod. "They are my heart," I said simply. "I have loved them, guided them, and stood beside them for 5 years. No title or legal document can define that bond." David rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitmore, is it true you gave up your career for this family?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "And would you say that decision caused personal resentment?" "No, it deepened my commitment to my children." "Yet you are not their legal mother," David pressed. "Shouldn't that fact dictate custody?" I met his gaze. "Being a mother is not defined by biology. It is defined by love and actions, and Abigail and Ethan know that truth." The room held its breath. Judge Keller's expression remained unreadable. Then she spoke. "I would like to hear directly from Abigail and Ethan in chambers, no counsel present. We will adjourn for a recess while arrangements are made." My heart surged with both fear and hope. "We're ready," Abigail whispered. As they followed the court officer from the room, I gripped Susan's hand. "They'll tell the truth," I said. "I know they will." she replied, but be prepared. Daniel's fight isn't over. Just then, Meredith's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, eyes narrowing. Claire, Daniel's team just submitted a new motion, one that could change everything before this hearing is over. Claire, Daniel's team just submitted a new motion, one that could change everything before this hearing is over. Meredith's voice sliced through the air. Susan's eyes narrowed. What kind of motion? She asked sharply. Meredith scanned her phone. Request for an immediate temporary gag order to prevent Abigail and Ethan's statements from being considered due to alleged coaching by their stepmother. Of course, Susan muttered. He's terrified of what they'll say. My stomach nodded. They were trying to silence my children, to erase their voices, just as they had tried to erase mine. Can the judge allow it? I asked, pulse racing. Only if she believes there's credible evidence of coercion, Susan replied. And we've prepared for that. Hold steady. Moments later, court reconvened. Counselor Harmon, you've filed an additional motion. Judge Keller said, her tone cool. State your reasoning. David rose with practiced calm. Your Honor, we have concerns regarding Mrs. Whitmore's undue influence over the children. In the interest of ensuring their testimony is uninfluenced, we respectfully request a temporary gag order, preventing their statements from being admitted at this time. What evidence supports this claim? Keller asked. Affidavits from a former nanny and emails suggesting strategic coaching, David replied, submitting the documents. Susan stood. Your Honor, the nanny referenced here ceased employment 2 years ago under contentious terms. The emails in question are benign discussions between mother and children about preparing for a difficult day, not evidence of coercion. This motion is a transparent attempt to silence the children's authentic voices. Judge Keller's gaze sharpened. Mr. Harmon, I will review this thoroughly. For now, the children's in-chamber statements will proceed as adjult. Motion is under advisement. Relief rippled through me, but only for a moment. The fight was far from over. Minutes later, Abigail and Ethan were called back, each entering the judge's chambers separately, accompanied only by a court-appointed guardian. I paced the hall outside, heart hammering. My children were fighting a battle no child should face, but they had insisted on this. They wanted to be heard. They'll be fine, Olivia whispered. They're stronger than you think. I nodded, though tears stung my eyes. One by one they returned, faces pale but proud. Abigail clutched my hand tightly. We told the truth, she whispered, no matter what he says. Before I could reply, the bailiff called us back into court. Judge Keller resumed her seat, her expression unreadable. I have reviewed the recent motion in the children's statements, she began. I find no credible evidence of coercion. Their voices will be considered in this matter. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped in a shudder. But Daniel's mask never slipped. He sat rigid, hands clenched beneath the table. Based on the preliminary hearing, Keller continued, I will not grant Mr. Whitmore's request for sole temporary custody. A joint parental engagement arrangement will be implemented pending full custody review. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. I reached for Abigail and Ethan's hands. We had not won the war, but this was a battle claimed. Furthermore, Keller added, the court expects full cooperation from both parties moving forward. Any attempt to undermine the children's relationships with either parent will be viewed most seriously. Court adjourned. As we stood to leave, Daniel approached, expression cold, voice low. This isn't over, he said, and next time, you won't be so lucky. I met his gaze evenly. It's about luck, I said softly. It's about truth, and your grip on them is slipping. He walked away, jaw tight. Outside, the cool autumn air filled my lungs like a tonic. We did it, Meredith whispered, tears in her eyes. For now, Susan added, but be ready. Daniel's next move will be faster and dirtier. As we gathered the children, Robert approached, phone in hand. Claire, you need to see this, he said grimly. On the screen, a leaked private email from me, taken out of context, was spreading online, courtesy of an anonymous source. Daniel's playing the public game again, Olivia said. And I knew we were far from done. What devastating impact will Daniel's latest public smear campaign have on Claire's fragile legal victory and the children's sense of safety? If your most private words were twisted and exposed to the world, would you still have the strength to fight for your family? Stay with us, because in Chapter 5, the battle shifts beyond the courtroom, and Claire must confront the darkest corners of Daniel's manipulation to protect the life she's fighting to rebuild. Chapter 5. The home they tried to erase. A house holds many secrets. Some are buried in walls, others hide in plain sight. I stood at the threshold of Beacon Hill, a place that once meant family, now little more than a stage where betrayal had played out. The judge's ruling had granted me temporary legal access to retrieve personal belongings, one of the few concessions we had secured. But this was more than a visit to collect clothes and boxes. It was a confrontation with the life Daniel wanted, erased. Stay sharp, Susan had advised. Document everything. If you find anything suspicious, copy it, photograph it, preserve it. And be ready, Olivia had added. Daniel may try something. I wasn't alone. Meredith had insisted on accompanying me, armed with a portable scanner. Abigail and Ethan were staying with Robert and Eleanor. For their sake, I needed to walk this next step without them. Let's begin, Meredith said softly as we crossed the threshold. The house was eerily quiet. The warmth that had once filled its walls was gone, replaced with a sterile chill. Look at this, Meredith murmured. The foyer wall now displayed a new set of family photos. Daniel, Vanessa, and the children, Claire nowhere in sight. He's rewriting history, I whispered, bile rising in my throat, but I pushed the anger aside. We had work to do. We moved room by room, methodically gathering what mattered. Family albums, Ethan's childhood drawings, Abigail's dance recital videos. Susan had warned us to stay within the scope of the court order, but she also knew what I hoped to find, proof of Daniel's financial manipulations. Let's check your old studio, Meredith suggested. I hesitated. That room had been my sanctuary, a space where I had once dreamed of returning to the world of art. Daniel had sealed it off after filing for custody. Now, I opened the door with trembling fingers. Dust motes danced in the slanting light. My easel stood in the corner, untouched, but it wasn't the art supplies that caught my eye. It was the battered metal filing cabinet half hidden beneath a faded drop cloth. He wouldn't have left anything obvious, I said. Maybe not, Meredith replied. But he's arrogant. Let's look. The drawers groaned in protest. Most contained old receipts, project drafts, but in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of legal pads, I found a slim folder marked. My pulse quickened. Inside were unsigned legal drafts, outlining plans to move family trust funds and property titles into accounts solely under Daniel's name, with Vanessa listed as a future beneficiary. We've got him, Meredith whispered. This proves intent to defraud, overlapping with his custody filings. I photographed every page, heart pounding. Then Meredith tapped my shoulder. Claire, look at this. She had found an unlabeled USB drive taped beneath the drawer. We pocketed it carefully. Anything else? I asked, voice tight. Let's check the kids' rooms, Meredith said. If he's staging a false narrative, he may have planted things. We moved quickly. In Abigail's room, the changes were subtle. Her artwork removed, books replaced with pristine, untouched volumes. In Ethan's room, a single framed photo caught my eye. Him with Daniel and Vanessa. A recent shot. Ethan had never mentioned it. He's trying to reshape their memories, I whispered. Before we could check further, a voice rang out, Claire. I turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold. Collect your things and leave. You're here under court order. Don't push your luck. I met his gaze, steadily. We'll leave when we're done. And you should know your attempts to erase me are failing. His lips curled into a thin smile. We'll see about that. He turned and walked away. Meredith exhaled shakily. We have what we came for, she said. Now let's get out before he tries something else. As we reached the door, my phone buzzed. A message from Ben, just decrypted, the USB. Claire, you need to see this, it's bigger than we thought. Just decrypted the USB. Claire, you need to see this. It's bigger than we thought. Ben's message made my breath catch. I clutched the phone tighter as Meredith and I hurried down the front steps of the Beacon Hill house, Daniel's cold stare burning into my back as we left. What do you think's on it? Meredith asked as we reached her car. I don't know, I replied, voice tight. But if Ben says it's big, it's big. Within 20 minutes, we were seated in the Morrison Apartments study. Robert had already cleared the desk. Ben sat before his laptop, the USB drive connected, Susan leaning over his shoulder. We've got emails, Ben said grimly. Lots of them. Between Daniel, Vanessa, and, get this, a financial consultant out of Miami. Miami? Olivia echoed, brows knitting. Why would Daniel be working with someone there? Because Florida's asset protection laws are some of the most favorable in the country, Ben explained. He's trying to move money into trusts and shell corporations that would be harder to trace or reclaim. I swallowed hard. Can we prove intent? I asked. Ben clicked through folders. These are detailed. Draft agreements, wire instructions, even a timeline. Coinciding with his custody filings, he was preparing to gut the family's financial base right as he sought to strip you of legal standing with the kids. Susan straightened. This is crucial. If we present this to the judge, it not only undermines his financial credibility, it supports our claim of a deliberate campaign to destabilize you and the children. He wasn't just trying to win custody, Meredith said softly. He was trying to make sure you couldn't fight back, financially or emotionally. A fresh wave of fury surged within me. Then we'll fight harder, I said. There's more, Ben added. Look at this. On screen, an email thread appeared. Subject line, Media Narrative Strategy. Daniel had been working with a PR consultant to craft a smear campaign against me, targeting school boards, parent groups, even leveraging sympathetic media contacts. He planned the whole thing, Olivia said, voice shaking. The headlines, the leaks, all of it. We'll counter it, Susan said firmly. But this is a game changer. The judge must see it. How soon can we file? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Ben replied. First thing, we'll file a motion to compel full financial disclosure and introduce this as evidence of bad faith. I exhaled slowly. Then let's do it. Across the room, Eleanor entered quietly, Abigail and Ethan in tow. Their eyes widened as they sensed the tension. What happened? Abigail asked. I met her gaze, trying to keep my voice steady. We found proof that your father has been trying to hurt us in ways we didn't even know. Abigail's jaw clenched. Then we fight back. We will, I promised. Later that evening, as the apartment grew quiet, I stood alone by the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, beautiful and indifferent. I thought of the home Daniel had tried to erase. Not just the house on Beacon Hill, but the family we had built. He could scrub photos from walls, rewrite narratives in court, manipulate headlines, but he couldn't erase the truth of who we were. Or who I had become. You underestimated me, Daniel, I whispered. My phone buzzed again, this time from Susan. Claire, we may have an opening. The judge has scheduled a hearing to review new evidence, but Daniel's attorney just counterfillered, and it looks like they're bringing in a surprise witness. Who? I typed back quickly. Susan's reply came fast. Vanessa! She's going to testify. What will Vanessa reveal on the witness stand? And is her testimony the final weapon Daniel needs to destroy Claire's fight for her family? If the person helping to tear your life apart were about to speak in open court, would you have the courage to face them? and the lies they might tell. Stay with us, because in Chapter 6, Claire's greatest battle begins, where every word, every truth, and every betrayal will collide in one final reckoning. Chapter 6, The Family I Now Choose. Some families are bound by blood, others by choice. The strongest are built from truth. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and windswept, Boston's skyline blurred behind thick panes of courthouse glass. I stood in the lobby of Suffolk County Family Court, nerves taut, hands clasped tighter than I realized. Today would not be like the others. Today, Vanessa Blake would testify, and with her, Daniel would unleash the final chapter of his carefully crafted campaign to sever me from Abigail and Ethan forever. "Are you ready?" Susan asked quietly beside me. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Across the room, Daniel stood surrounded by his team. Vanessa arrived moments later, poised, elegant, dressed in subtle designer tones. Her eyes met mine with a hint of practiced sympathy. "She'll play it soft," Susan warned, "sympathetic, framing you as unstable, herself as the calming presence the children need. But she knows the truth," I whispered. "And that will show if you stay centered," Susan said. "We've armed the judge with what matters. The USB evidence, the children's statements, the financial manipulation. This is Daniel's last swing." As court convened, Judge Keller's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes were sharp. She had seen the new filings, and I sensed she was prepared. The session opened with Susan submitting the full USB findings as evidence, meticulously documented proof of Daniel's intent to strip assets and manipulate the public narrative. The judge admitted them into record without hesitation. Daniel's composure cracked ever so slightly. Then came the moment we had prepared for. "Your Honor," David Harmon announced, "we call Vanessa Blake to the stand." Vanessa took her place, offering a polished smile to the court. "Miss Blake," Harmon began smoothly, "how would you describe your relationship with Mr. Whitmore and his children?" "Supportive," Vanessa replied. "Daniel is a devoted father. I've only sought to ease the transition for Abigail and Ethan as they adapt to difficult changes at home." "And how would you describe Mrs. Whitmore's behavior toward the children?" Vanessa's gaze softened, practiced. "I've witnessed intense, emotional episodes, outbursts, controlling behavior. The children often seemed anxious, uncertain around her." A chill ran through me. Lies, spun with gentle conviction. "And your view of their best interest moving forward?" "They need stability," Vanessa said. "A calm, consistent environment, one I believe Daniel can best provide." Susan rose. "Ms. Blake," she began evenly, "are you aware of financial documents now entered into evidence showing Daniel's intent to move assets to accounts naming you as beneficiary?" A flicker of unease crossed Vanessa's face. They had no involvement in Daniel's financial decisions. "Yet you are named in the documents," Susan pressed. "Are you saying Daniel acted without your knowledge regarding funds intended to support his children?" I can't speak to that," Vanessa faltered. Susan shifted tone. "Ms. Blake, are you aware that Abigail and Ethan provided sworn statements contradicting your portrayal of their relationship with Mrs. Whitmore?" Vanessa's polished demeanor cracked further. "I was not informed of their statements." "One final question," Susan said. "Did you or Daniel discuss strategies for influencing the court's perception of Mrs. Whitmore via public media channels?" "No," Vanessa said quickly, but her voice wavered. Susan sat. Judge Keller leaned forward, gaze cool. "Ms. Blake, your testimony has been noted. You may step down." Vanessa returned to her seat beside Daniel, face pale. Susan turned to me. "Claire, now it's your turn to close this chapter. Stay grounded." I rose, heart pounding, but mind clear. The time to claim the truth had come. I rose from my seat, each step toward the witness stand deliberate, grounded. This was not the woman Daniel had once silenced, not the wife who'd swallowed her truth behind a perfect facade. I was Claire Whitmore, and this was my family. As I settled into the chair, Susan's voice anchored me. "Please describe your role in Abigail and Ethan's lives," she began. I looked to the judge first, then to my children, seated across the room. Faces open, unwavering. "Abigail and Ethan are not just Daniel's children," I said. "They are mine. I've loved them, guided them, stood beside them through every joy and heartbreak these past 5 years. That role was never about blood. It was built through presence, patience, and unwavering love." Susan nodded. "Mrs. Whitmore, how would you respond to the claims of instability and undue influence raised against you today?" I drew a steady breath. "I will not pretend these months have not been difficult," I said, "but difficulty does not equate to unfitness. I have never sought to control my children, only to protect them from manipulation and erasure. And they, in turn, have stood for me in ways no one could coerce or manufacture." Susan stepped back. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore." David Harmon rose, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, "you acknowledge giving up your career when you married Mr. Whitmore. Do you believe this dependent role affected your emotional stability?" "No," I answered clearly. "My decision was a choice rooted in love and service to my family. Dependence is not weakness. It becomes such only when weaponized by others." "You also acknowledge recent public reports showing private emails suggesting emotional strain?" he pressed. "Emails taken out of context, designed to paint a false narrative," I countered. "Emotional strain is not instability. It is the natural response of a mother fighting to preserve her family against calculated betrayal." "So you deny coaching the children to favor you in this case?" I met his gaze squarely. "I do. Their voices are their own. I have encouraged only honesty and courage." David seemed to weigh whether to push further, then withdrew. No further questions. I stepped down, legs steady beneath me. Judge Keller called for a brief recess. In the hallway, Abigail ran to me. "You are amazing, Mom," she whispered fiercely. "No matter what happens," I said softly, "we've told the truth, and that matters." The final session resumed. Judge Keller reviewed the full record, USV evidence, testimony, financial documents, and most importantly, the children's sworn statements. Her words carried no drama, only quiet finality. "Based on all evidence presented," she said, "the court finds no cause to alter the children's current parental structure. Joint parental engagement will proceed. Mrs. Whitmore is hereby granted full legal visitation rights and shared guardianship privileges consistent with her role as a de facto parent." I felt Abigail's hand slip into mine, Ethan's small fingers curling around the other. "Furthermore," Judge Keller continued, "the court strongly admonishes any further attempts to distort or manipulate public narrative against Mrs. Whitmore. Should such actions persist, sanctions will follow." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his eyes avoided mine. As court adjourned, Susan smiled. "You didn't just survive this, Claire. You claimed your place." Outside the courthouse, the crisp air felt electric with freedom. We had won, not just in law, but in truth. Later that evening, gathered in the warmth of Robert and Eleanor's living room, I looked around the circle. My circle: Olivia, Meredith, Ben, Robert, and Eleanor. Abigail and Ethan curled beside me on the couch. "We're still a family," Abigail said softly. "No," I corrected gently. "One we choose, one we build. Together." They smiled. The fight had forged us stronger, but as the fire crackled and laughter returned to the room, my phone buzzed again. An email. No sender, no subject. I opened it. One line only. "You think this is over? It's not."